All right, so doing more questions. A little behind. Some of these are going back as far as last Wednesday, so sometimes them's the breaks. With that, what are we at here? So, two questions from a student. What are some common challenges that students face in this course? Now, that could be my specific course, or it could be English 101. And then what advice would I give to help someone excel in this course? So, common challenges that students face in English 101 or first year comp or writing courses in general. If you check out my videos on PTSD or PTS for writing, or read my textbook, that's one of the big things. It really is that students develop a thought about themselves that they are just not good writers. And so it doesn't lean into growth mindset and say, that if I invest energy into this, I will get better. And I don't have to be amazing to be good or to be proficient or to be effective. And so, starting to shift the mentality, that would be one of the pieces of advice I regularly give is shift your mentality to it's not about being the best writer or an amazing writer or even a quote unquote good writer, because that good and bad are moral terms. Instead, it's about can I be effective with words and and other forms of communication? Like, can I? That's the key, and that is a toolbox. Effectiveness is based on toolboxes. You can be effective as a forklift driver if you have knowledge, certain knowledges in your toolbox, certain expertise in your toolbox. You can be effective as a postal worker, as a framer, as a computer coder, as an engineer, as a president, with it's a toolbox. And any of these things, I realize the political implications of what I just said. But no matter what, shifting mindset to effectiveness of writing or sufficiency of writing, does it do its communicative job? That's and changing your view of yourself to grow into that. And so that's one of the big pieces of advice. Common challenges in writing courses, aside from mindset, is am I scheduling the right amount of time? Am I saying, am I expecting something more? Like, check your expectations. If you're like, I can write 100 words in an hour, well, that's not terrible actually, but I bet you could write faster, especially if you didn't edit. And so if you check your expectations and you plan the right amount of time or a little more amount of time than you think it'll take, and you start working at multiple steps out on any project or essay, and that's true of this course and others, but that's one of the big things, writing process. So common challenges is people struggling with the amount of work a college course is in general, and the amount of work it takes to have not just writing, but quality, like writing that isn't thrown together, or writing that's not, most importantly, stressful or anxiety triggering. So, beyond that, some interesting statistics have to with research on first year writing has that if students don't pass first year writing and they fail it multiple times, they basically that it's really common for them to just stop going to college at all. But they don't do that with other classes the same way if they struggle. And so having a true understanding that this is still a college course and you should be gaining college level skills. So if you don't get it at first, like, don't just assume it's a writing course, so I should be good at it. So if I can't do it, I can't do college. That's a really common, like, statistically, like, tracked phenomena. But again, if you fix the first thing of like writing as a toolbox, that's less of an issue. The other thing, like, that's generally first year comp. My course specifically, if you go look at my rate my professor, sometimes students get frustrated because they have the expectation of a writing course that it will look just like high school, that it will have, that we'll be reading literary works, that we'll be doing analyses of that, and that it will be about the writing. Maybe it will be about practicing writing. But my course emphasizes writing as a content course. And this is built on research. This is built on experience and testing and all that fun stuff. But it still can rub people the wrong way if their expectations are different. So it's like, I don't have any problem being as rigorous in my course as someone might have the rigor expectation in a chemistry course or a math course, because I have a body of knowledge and expertise that if students have, they get better at a variety of things across life, which is why you see videos on both rhetoric and dating and essay writing and pickup lines. Because when you learn, because there is a core fundamental strength to being effective when it comes to communicating, and using the written word. So that can be a struggle for people. Sometimes the challenge, the feedback I get is, it was a fun course. Greg's responsive and all that fun stuff. He's slow at grading, which I am. There are a variety of reasons, ADHD notwithstanding. And also, the other is he sometimes teaches his course as if it were an upper level college course. So I'm not afraid to give people technical terms in the writing discipline, for the same reason that a chemist has no problem telling you about combustion equations or redox equations or reactivity. And nobody gets mad at chemistry for doing that. They just suck it up and do it. But when it's a writing course trying to give you content, sometimes people get grumpy. So that's common challenge, is expectations. If I give you writing content and specific expertise at a college level, sometimes that does get people a little grumpy. So coming in knowing that it's going to be a course where you are designed to grow through it, if you do all the work, you will get so much better. And the fruit of that is over the last 10 years of me teaching. That's how it is. So those are the ones that first come to mind. Let's see what other questions we have. Advice to excel in this course. Yeah. Get your work done on time. Architect your life to be wise. Plan project multiple steps out. All of those things are good things. Let's see what other questions we had sitting in the queue. Going back to Thursday. Did I miss one from that person? I don't think so. I don't think so. That was a question about working out, which I do, and sometimes I post about. I have been, at least in the last 6 months for sure, doing that more consistently. That one I responded to. When you say examples of writing, do you mean the 8 aspects of writing? Things like that. Those are already in my content. Let's see. So there was a question that came through. Examples. What are examples of writing in my everyday life, dealing with the collage and that sort of thing? So if you're, just make sure that if you're supposed to be writing about writing, if you're supposed to be talking about how writing's a thing, then you can use the 8 aspects of writing as guidance for that. So that means if you're like, I'm going to go and analyze, like if you're thinking about the example of hiking and you say, and some people might default to hiking and telling a story about when they went hiking and all of that fun stuff. Like, oh, it was a great experience. I went up to the rim and all this fun stuff. And I enjoyed this meaningful experience. That's not exactly what my projects are usually geared toward. They're usually asking you to take an example of writing, even if it's connected to hiking, and say, why does that work? So the signs for hiking, or don't feed the bears or whatever, especially not your femur, and those sorts of things. Why is that useful? How does it connect to the rhetorical strategies we're learning? How does it connect to components of language that we're learning? Now I know I have them in here, so let's keep going. Questions about one question that comes up sometimes with collages is, how do I use captions? How do I use, when I'm like, what's the point? Like if I have a collage, I've got like 30 pictures of examples of writing or whatever it is. So this is kind of a little bit of genre connection. But when you create a collage, one part of the role of a collage is to cluster the items in it. And sometimes that can help you organize if those things have anything to do with a future project, or just to structure how and group. And so sometimes adding labels to group, you can choose, it's your text, you can choose how you group those. Sometimes if it's for my class, you might be able to group them based on specific aspects of writing, but you could also group them based on location, where you took them from, whatever meaning you find in those. If it's based on visual design components that show up, or advertising, or type of product, like those are all options and you get to decide. So that's up to you. Sorry, I'm having to go through things that I didn't quite remember because it was so long ago. And that's my fault for waiting so long to do this. So I'm getting there. Challenge with the content of the course is that some days I feel like it's a lot and it's hard for me to maintain and remember all the information that's given. Okay, so this one is it was kind of a follow-up comment or question or challenge. And so this actually goes to the other person. So what are challenges people have in the course? Sometimes the content of the course some days feels like a lot. And this person specifically, I think, is in my 8-week class. And so my 8-week class is goes fast. And so I do end up having, like, it's supposed to be a normal college course has 9 hours. The 8-week has 18 hours worth of work spread across the week. And so it can feel like a lot, especially if you're not like warmed up into college yet. So it's, I guess that again, it comes down to it can be hard, but it's also good. And so sometimes doing a hard thing that's a good thing is just hard. And you have to make that mental adjustment from the beginning. And trust me, I've done some hard things. I've gone to college. I've left college. I've worked full time while going to college and beyond with overtime. I've had kids working full time while going to college full time. That's how I got my bachelor's and master's, is working construction. And I've said in other places, like literally typing essays with one hand while rocking a baby. So these are things that you sometimes life is challenging, and when you get and part of that is developing you into the person you're wanting to become. So the learning you're doing, even if it feels like a lot, even if you're not sure if you're retaining it all, and there are strategies for retention that I may have mentioned in other places, but sometimes that's just how it feels. It feels like a lot, but the consistently trying and leaning into and struggling is going to get you to a place where you are better at the other end. And one of the struggles with really good teaching, so there's like the good teacher that people don't realize how much they learned from. And then there's the teaching that the good teacher who makes sure you know you learned. And sometimes good teachers with kind hearts set up a course so wonderfully that people will go through it and not realize how much they've changed until 6 months after the course is over. So then you kind of lose that appreciation because it was so well designed. And so sometimes I do encourage faculty and stuff to make sure you have moments of like to wow or add the pizzazz or the reflective moments to say, look where you started. If it's, we do this with training. Look, you started lifting 4 reps of 100 6 months ago, and now you're at 10 reps of 200 6 months later. That's measurable. So sometimes what you can do is just make sure you're paying attention to the growth. In writing, that could be how fast are you writing? It could be how much are you writing in the same amount of time? It could be just the level of stress that's gone down because, oh, I know how to use that technology. Oh, I know how to format an APA. Like there's all these little expertise moments that we find and that show that we've grown. So make sure as you go, if you're getting worn out, take stock, take inventory of what's been added since you started. And that sometimes makes the effort and the hard a little more manageable, because you can go, there's a vision for this. I'm doing a hard thing that is paying off because I'm looking at the specific things that it's giving me. It made me better in that conversation with my spouse, my significant other, my child who keeps arguing with me, whatever it is. Okay. What are some tips for good peer review? I do have videos on that. I also have videos on giving feedback from an instructor perspective too. But if you're a student, don't go look at those. But giving good feedback, I have, you want to start with affirmation, and it's not wrong. People don't get enough compliments on what they're doing well. And so it's important that when people do good things, that you acknowledge that. And real quick, I realized I didn't check to make sure the audio is coming through. So I'm just going to pause for 30 seconds here and pull up the stream and make sure it's actually getting everything. So sorry. Getting everything. Cool. We're good. I heard my voice. All right. So first, affirm and be specific in what the practice is that you're affirming. And then you can look for bigger patterns and strategies. So look for bigger patterns and strategies overall. And we'll do more in 2 minutes. So take a break for 2 minutes. All right. Well, that's what happens when you start cooking ribs and they have to be switched from the high temperature to the low temperature. So my daughter was knocking on the door to say, "Hey, Papa, you're supposed to switch." So the short version on peer feedback is go watch the video. But the short thing is build people up, don't beat them up. Remember that what you draw people's focus to is what they'll remember. So whether that's something they're doing well or poorly, they will remember it and they will focus on that, or focus on whether they were doing well or whether they were doing poorly. And there's so much negative that you just don't have to spend as much time. And if you are going to frame feedback that's constructive, you can always treat it like a skill, not an identity marker. And that's one of the big challenges that I have when people give feedback. And you can just say what's happening. You don't have to say whether it's good or bad. You can say, when you write this way, it causes me to have this reaction. For this reason, I think, right? And so if you don't want that reaction in your readers, do this, and you could do this instead to get this other reaction. Then it's not so much about like a moral issue or did I do it right or how good or bad I am. One second, I gotta let the cat out. I totally planned this effectively, I promise. Anyways, so yeah, so those are the important things when giving feedback. What else? I was trying to figure out. Yes, and sometimes I give peer feedback assignments, and sometimes I just share people's work. There is good research, and most anyone who's been in my class through at least one round of feedback major projects knows this, that I usually have students read the article. It's better to give than receive. Research on the benefit of actively trying to give others feedback and focusing on targeted things that made the other person's writing more effective, or highlighting the benefits, whether it's structural, whether it's whatever it is, any of the 8 aspects you can use, but usually getting beyond just sentence level stuff. When you go to give other people feedback, research shows that you grow more. So do it more often, and remember to practice affirmation, because there's no reason to beat down someone who probably already feels bad about the writing, probably spent a lot of time getting a bunch of red marks on their paper. Even if the thoughts were good and meaningful, some teachers, for better or worse, are really good at making sure that sentence level cleanness is a value. And so sometimes that means that students get the sense, and I've spoken this in other places, students get the sense that if they don't have clean sentences, they're a bad writer. If I don't have good grammar, I'm a bad writer. So, but there's more on that I can get distracted by. Okay, what else? Okay, one question that came up had to do with the fishbone diagram. So one, I do teach the fishbone diagram and other visual models, mapping models in my course. So fishbone diagramming, stakeholder analysis, Venn diagramming, any of these count as writing for one. Keep it in mind. And remember that there are, that any type of modeling of a problem is a form of writing. It's encoding information in symbols, shapes, letters, whatever it is. Even the visual layout of a bubble map is a visual encoding of information, even if it's just answering the question of what affects this thing that I care about. But those visual diagrams, one, they count as writing. It's encoding information. They help you take complex problems, map them out, structure them, and better understand them so that you can do something about it. So even if it's just communicating with yourself, things like fishbone diagramming, stakeholder analysis, even bubble mapping and Venn diagramming, very meaningful forms of communication, because they help you essentialize a core situation or system and figure it out. There are other genres. I have videos on them. It's fine. But yes, fishbone diagramming is good. If you had it in my class, one of the things, like this question is, will we be using this again? Any tool I give you, I assume that you will then go and use on your projects. And that's true. If you're in a class and they give you something, they give you a tool and a set of information, a series of guiding questions, the expectation is you're going to keep coming back to that and using that as what's called a heuristic. So a heuristic is a pattern. It's like an algorithm, but not so strict. A heuristic's like a pattern that you can reapply a template of a process template you can reapply to similar situations. So if you're asked to do a fishbone diagram on something, and you learn the skill of fishbone diagramming, the expectation is other situations after that, you'll keep using that to understand. You'll keep using that tool. You've been equipped. You have that tool in your toolbox to make you more effective. And so keep using that, even if it's not a required thing. Though when it comes to writing, doing a fishbone diagram, embedding that as an image in an analysis paper or something like that can be really meaningful. If you're doing a stakeholder analysis map and you do bubble maps of stakeholders, groups of people who affect a problem, that can be extremely helpful to essentialize a situation that you're trying to communicate to your readers. Beyond that, say you're doing research. Say you're supposed to be doing an annotated bibliography. You've got 12 sources. If your teacher will let you, and even if they won't, you can do it on the side to help yourself. But you can map out the relationships between different researchers. And even if it's just bubble map, drawing lines, connections. So be using visual diagrams. And if someone in any class gives you a tool that seems like it could be used in a variety of contexts, or they say it can be used in a variety of contexts, but they want you to use it here, use it there, and then continue as the course goes on to use it in other situations where it fits or where you're stuck. So when I give students lists of questions in my textbook, when I give students specific analysis models, the idea is that I'm giving those to you as tools for you to keep using. So yes, keep using fishbone diagramming anywhere that it gets you unstuck, even if it's just a piece of it. There's, fishbone diagramming has anywhere from 4 to 6 or 7 parts, or 8 parts even, depending on which version of the model you do. So if you want to ask yourself about people, processes, environment, any of that, materials, any of that, if any of it allows you to pull apart what you're analyzing or describing or trying to figure out a little bit better, then use it. You don't have to use the whole model every time, but if any part of it will help, and it takes you 30 seconds to do a quick map of that, or even a basic version where it's like causes and effect, that's good. The next one is there any way to use critical thinking without burning out your brain? So the technical terms for burning out your brain have to do with cognitive load or cognitive overload or cognitive processing. So there's research that you can go do in psychology, and it is a skill just like anything else. And when I am both out of practice or just over dealing with a lot, I have a certain mental capacity for critical thinking versus not. And so when I get a lot of my research done using a text-to-voice app, kind of accessibility technology style, so I can listen while I'm traveling and that kind of thing. But my brain has to process that a certain way, and so it takes a certain amount of energy to do that. So recognize brain burnout is real. Research on study patterns show, and I think that if you are planning a 2-hour study session, if you study for 20 minutes or 25 and take a 1 to 4 minute break to walk around, stretch, drink some water, something, and shift, and then come back at the 30-minute mark, you're going to be better off in that 2 hours if you do that multiple times than trying to just stay super focused on something. And so when it comes to cognitive load, you have to recognize when you're no longer working at max efficiency, because your brain doesn't work when you brute force things, right? That's why if we're struggling with reading, there's a point where your brain just won't. You read 100 words, you're good. You read 100 pages, you stop being so good. So you have to know your capacity and intentionally try and stretch that capacity by practicing, which is what so many of our first-year gen ed courses are designed to do. It's why one of the general education outcomes, required student learning outcomes for the college, not for any particular course, but for the college, is connected to critical thinking. And there's a variety of ways of measuring critical thinking. So the short answer is there an easy way to use critical thinking without burning your brain out? Yes, in small increments, steadily over time, just like most every other thing. As an analogy, about 18 months ago, I did a challenge because someone was like, and I wasn't in particularly good shape. This was a physical challenge, but the same principle is going to apply when you think about critical thinking. Anytime you're using analysis or a new tool or something that is unfamiliar or uncommon to you. So someone said that doing 500 push-ups a day was more mental than it was physical. It wasn't about, and they gave reasonings for why and stuff like that. And I'm not saying I think that the person who gave this is cool or anything, but I decided to try it because I'm like, well, I'm a smart guy. Even if I'm out of shape, let's see what I can come up with. So to accomplish the 500 push-ups in one day, which I did do poorly, but I did it. Form wasn't great by the end; it burned. But what I did was I thought about my day, thought about when I was going to be optimal, like when the muscles I would need would be most fresh, and when I was not going to be able to do any push-ups whatsoever because I had a commitment and I was trying to do it privately at the time. I didn't want anyone to see me, so I was just trying to do this challenge without people knowing, and maybe in case I didn't succeed, but it did, so it's cool. With that, what I started with like, okay, if I do 5 push-ups every 10 minutes, that'll only take 30 seconds and I'll be able to recover before I need the next set, because it's not a lot. And I'll try and do as many of those before noon as I can so that I kind of bank that amount of time so that when the afternoon hits and I start getting tired and my brain starts getting tired and my body starts getting tired and I lose willpower and all that I've already banked enough to keep momentum going when I pick back up. So the same thing's true with critical thinking. And I didn't get to a crunch zone at the end of the night because even when it was hard, I had created enough cushion so that at the end of the night, I was able to have a more extended break, like an hour and a half, 2 hours. I had banked like 350 by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so then I had a little bit of a break for an outing we were going to do. And then I was able to kind of slowly and steadily work at it through the evening. And I think I finished at like 11 o'clock at night. And so I was able to kind of give myself longer breaks and longer spaces, especially when I got to the place where I couldn't do 5 at a time. I had to do 2 or 3 at a time because my arm muscles were like, no, sir, not happening. So critical thinking is like that. Doing anything new is like that. The more you do it, the more you practice it in small increments, the easier it is. And you build capacity for doing that thing. If you try and brute force it and spend an hour critically thinking and trying to analyze all the little pieces, sometimes that's useful, but sometimes you don't have enough tools to fill that hour anyways. So what you want to do is start with pieces and focus in on small, manageable chunks. That was probably longer and more unnecessarily complex for that example. But that's the answer to that question. Let's see. Question. One question comes up about the drafts in my class. I have a process of 3 to 5 drafts for every major project or assignment, whether it's a collage or an essay or whatever it is. It's meant to build. And so for the first draft, I usually recommend, like good, healthy writing process, just get your ideas out, build some momentum. The second draft, continue getting ideas out, but start thinking about how you're clustering what you've written so far and keep the things that actually seem to connect or that you're most excited about. Beyond that, then you should have, once you've got more substantial material just roughed in without thinking about sentence level polishing, you really should think about big picture structure. What comes first, second, third, all that fun stuff, and whatnot. So when you do that, you begin framing the process. My daughters just got home with a friend, so I'm distracted because you're going to hear them. So when you get into that, like draft 3-ish, you really should be starting to think about big picture structure. You should be trying, if you haven't started incorporating research yet, you should be doing that, because research is something you can riff off of. That's important. Like, it's not just something that's a requirement. The idea is that you'd be able to use someone else's thoughts and respond to them as a back and forth. So almost like a dialogue. When someone else asks you a question or presents a thought, we're given an exigence or exigency to respond to, like we've learned in some of my other rhetoric videos. So we want to use the research or any other thing in our life as something to push us and help us build more. So if we get stuck halfway through a writing process, pulling in the research at draft 2, draft 3, draft 4 is really important, not just because it's a requirement for a final draft, but because it helps us think through our ideas and sometimes stirs us up to more ideas. So it's a great idea generating thing. So as far as grading goes, I will usually say in the draft which thing I encourage you to do. As far as grading goes, if you're hitting the word count and accomplishing the requirements of that particular draft, which is usually just word count, or possibly number of pictures, or use one source, whatever it is that I say you need for that draft is all you need to get full points. That doesn't mean, pause. I should have just left the mic unmuted. You'd hear my wife saying, "Are you in a meeting?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just answering student questions on my live stream that very few people will ever watch." Anyway, but with that, drafts. So so as far as grading goes on my drafts, if it doesn't say it's required, but it's required by the final, then it might be wise for you to do it, but you'll still get the points as long as you're hitting the word count or whatever I say is required for that specific draft. You don't have to do everything for the final draft to the final draft, but it can be wise not to push off some of these things, because if I say you should have pictures for the project, it's good to kind of work those in steadily. Sometimes the pictures, just like the sources, will give you something to riff off of. They'll give you something to respond to. They'll help you notice something you missed when you're just trying to remember things, and you've got that picture right there and you're like, oh, I forgot it had that bright red coloring. That makes me think that I can analyze this part of the visual rhetoric or whatever it is. But yeah, so that's how I approach drafts. It's a good idea to always be working toward the final goal and pacing yourself, because not all professors will. But if for my drafts, usually it's just word count, or if I specifically say for draft 2, be sure you have X, Y, and Z. That's all you need. Nothing more, nothing less. Definitely nothing less. Sometimes I'll give a range just to give you some options. You can always go more, but you should be careful writing too much in too early of a draft. If I'm asking for 300 words and someone gives me 800 or 1,000, it makes me think they got help either from AI or something else. Or it makes me think that they binge wrote and are trying to bank a draft where they shouldn't. Because the whole purpose of the writing process is that multiple drafts makes your writing better because of the spacing between them. And if you write 800 words for a 1,000-word essay in the first week, and then you take a break for a week and a half, it's not as good. Research says it's not as good to have that type of spacing, like to do a cram and a break. Instead, steady, consistent work over time, 300, 300, 300, whatever, is going to be more effective for most writers. Even if a writer says, or even if a writer feels like they can write under pressure well, that's a good skill. And if you do it well, go into journalism. That being said, if it's not healthy for you, even people who do it well, it's not healthy for them. And so you want to look and make sure that if you are binge writing and you can produce a lot, one, that's a strength and you should lean into it where it fits. But don't do it if it's causing you to have an imbalance in other parts of your life, or because it's putting out a fire. That kind of thing is a bad idea. That's where we get into PTS for writing. It's the same thing that happens when someone goes, I haven't been to the gym in a month, so I'm going to work every muscle group, every part of my body, and for 2 hours, and so I can finally get it. And then they're just done for 5 days. They can't go back to the gym. And that's got such a negative experience of healing and like, oh, I'm so sore for the whole week, that they don't want to go back. And so what we want is steady progression that's fun, that's enjoyable, that is productive, that we can feel good about. And we do that multiple times to progressively. Okay, there's that. Do. Questions back and trying up. Okay. Questions about when we do an iceberg theory, how do we get to a sweet spot of inferring enough information to make interesting, but not so much that it's overwhelming? So they're saying, I guess I may be thinking more of the collateral audience, and we won't make all of our audiences happy, but how do we stop ourselves from getting too wordy? So I'll share a little bit of what I told them already. I typed this one out for them because seemed like a meaningful thing, and I kind of had the mental awareness to do it, even though it was like 10:45 Saturday. But being wordy is having diluted communication. That's different than balancing for an audience. So you want to start with your target audience or user, and consider what they'll really need. You can. Wow, I realized that I had weird moments is in my response to them. So short version is there's a difference between that's not going to be short. There's a difference between being wordy and targeting your audience, or trying to find the sweet spot for iceberg theory. So for those needing context, the iceberg theory says that what you see on the surface is only like 10 or 20% of what's happening with an iceberg, hence the Titanic. And if you've watched those videos, you know what I'm talking about. And one of the points that I make is the waterline can move because your professors aren't just regular old explorers at the top of the iceberg in a ship. They could be really knowledgeable in that particular thing. And so whether they're in a rowboat or whether they've got scuba gear on or whether they're in a submarine, they may have more expertise than you. And so what you see as like this amazing revelation moment is just kind of a Monday for them. That's good learning for you, but from a rhetorical audience-oriented standpoint, sometimes you have to adjust your depth to account for them getting something new. So I usually recommend being more targeted and specific so you can delve a little deeper into a specific context to give them something refreshing, even if the perspective's something they're very familiar with. The question here then really has to do with what if I get too wordy? And those are two different things. So being wordy means you've got communication that isn't doing a job of being clear or being detailed. So you get more specific and less diluted, so that your wording's more powerful. You can also use technologies to allow varying depths of engagement. So this is more about crafting a document or crafting a piece of communication that can engage with multiple levels of audience awareness or levels of audience expertise. And so there's a whole subfield called content strategy or content strategy management. There's something called single source authoring that allows you to design, to put in all the necessary information for something, but only select certain depths of response for different platforms or publication styles. So an example might be a drop-down box that has, maybe you've got 8 questions with snippet answers or snippet definitions. And then when you click on it, you get a larger paragraph. And within that paragraph, there are links out to other deeper knowledge resources so that if someone needs all of the context, they can drill down and drill down and drill down. But if they just need the quick version, they can skim. So that is designing a text to account for not the perfect amount of information, because you'll never know that if you're writing for more than just one reader. But what you can do is design the way you present it to allow for people who don't know or don't always remember enough context to be able to move forward and understand the message you've got. Let's see. Yeah, it kind of uses that mentality of an outline versus an essay. An outline might be enough for someone. Like if you give me an outline of an argument, I can build the paper in my head. If you tell me I'm going to do this point, this point, this point, I've got this source, this source, this source, and it's in an area that I know, and I know those sources, then I'm just going to build the argument you have in my head. I don't even need you to write it. Which is probably really frustrating for some people, and also something I'm working on. But like I'll be sitting in church on Sundays and I'll hear the premise at the beginning, and I hear well that where how they framed it, and my brain builds the sermon outline in about 2 minutes, and then I'm like, okay, cool. And then I'm listening and going through, and what I start doing is I start looking for other reference material that goes along with what I expect to come next. And every now and then I'm pleasantly surprised when it takes a left turn in a good way. So that's kind of cool. But you get, depending on who the audience is, I'm a specialist in this area, so don't judge me or put that pressure on other people to do that either. But that's why it's good to be aware of who your audience is. Okay, let's see what else we got. Scrolling up. Okay. Let's see. One struggle people say they have, a student says they have. I'm confused about how stakeholder maps include the audience. Would the audience be part of the map, or does it give you a better idea? Okay, so stakeholder maps can be ways to map audience. So stakeholder maps, the short version is that they start with the thing like the short version of it is, I have a thing I'm studying, a topic, an event, a whatever. It goes in the center of this map. And stakeholders are people who affect that thing or are affected by it. So I could say the Super Bowl, and then I'd start bubbling out groups, specific people or groups of people that affect or are affected by the Super Bowl. And so we could say players, coaches, owners. We could also say marketing execs, advertisers, certain companies or brands. We could say the people who have to deal with traffic, even though they don't like the sport. We could pull this out and get all these bubble maps. So if I wanted to talk to people about the Super Bowl, I would use those groups, or even specific people, depending on how fine-tuned I get. Maybe the Super Bowl has a specific team that I know has a specific manager. That person is a specific stakeholder. And so if I want to look at stakeholder maps, it can help me just understand who is affected by or who affects this thing. Or it could be, if I'm going to write something about this topic, all of these people could be my audience. So how do I craft a message that targets either all of them or targets just this group? And that helps me. And then if it's going to be just this group, I can delve deeper and say, well, I want to only target something about the Super Bowl that has to do with advertisers, people who need to advertise for the Super Bowl. Maybe I'm working for a network, a television network, and I need to target the people who usually advertise for the Super Bowl. So then I start listing all of my potential audiences. And if I'm wanting them to buy my commercial space during that time, that ad space, well, I have to craft it with their needs in mind. And so I can use stakeholder analysis as a general mapping tool to understand a problem, a situation, a topic, or I can say, because I'm writing about this thing and these people are affected by it, and I want them to change their behavior or do this thing or try something, whatever, I can better target the audience because I've created, I've represented them. I've thought about who they are, and I can target them. The other thing that we can borrow from technical and professional writing and communication and marketing is this idea of a user profile or an avatar, is that and those are supposed to be data-based people. So data-based profiles, data-based, it's a terrible way of saying it, but it's a data-based stereotype. So if I know that 800 of 1,000 people who do this thing all have these 3 behaviors, income traits, favorite types of food, well, that means that I can create a user profile or an avatar of that group of 800. And if I target that imagined like kind of amalgam or summary of that person or stereotype, database stereotype, user profile, then that means I'm going to have effective communication for that group roughly. Now there is another group involved, but if my goal is to target this particular avatar, this particular user profile, it means that I'm going to shift my example. So if I know that 800 of 1,000 people in that group like Doritos, and I'm trying to encourage them to stop eating snack food, I might have to directly attack the reason why Doritos are bad. if they're bad, that sort of thing. And so, or why, if they decrease the amount of Doritos they eat, it would be really good and it would resonate. The alternative is also, I can intentionally avoid Doritos and talk about the snacks while with and skirt around the thing that's their biggest trouble, because sometimes it becomes a pinch point. Anyway, I may have gone too far on that example. And if you like Doritos, I'm sorry. I do too. I just haven't eaten them because I've been on a keto diet. So maybe it's just that I'm a little jealous. Moving on. But yes, it can give you a better idea of who the audience members are, to use a stakeholder map, because you're defining people. And based on a topic, scenario, or situation or context. And if you're analyzing that context, knowing who the people are or who you might be talking to automatically gives you a primary and secondary audience. Collateral audience is a little harder, which was part of this question, but collateral audience actually may have been part of the other question. But yes, it definitely gives you a vision of who your primary and secondary audience is. It also makes you more intentional about potential collateral audiences, because you can target these two, the primary audience you need to target, the secondary audience that you anticipate, and the collateral audiences. If you do a stakeholder analysis detailed enough, you get a sense of who you weren't ever really planning on seeing this, but just in case, you might put a little snippet in there for them. Let's see. And so then you shift people who were in your collateral audience that was just kind of the, who knows, into the secondary audience by doing that. And so it's a better, you do more and more powerfully with that kind of audience work. Okay, let's see. I think, okay, let me try this, because I might have to go to my Canvas inbox where I know some people had asked. So right now I get text messages. I ask students to give text messages to me with questions. And so as part of that, I do try to make sure that I respond to those. So that's where I'm rolling through now. And then I also have the Canvas inbox that I ask people to, because I want to make sure that all the pieces of communication are working. And that got me to, let's see. So with that, there was someone who said, as I get into the second draft of an essay, do I have any tips for thinking through the new draft? Any specific questions if I'm struggling to think? And so in this case, they're doing an analysis of an example of writing. And so the best thing you can do is go back to the material I've already given you. So the 8 aspects of writing have various things you could pull out. So if you wanted to ask yourself questions, how does this thing communicate knowledge based on the scientific aspect of writing? How does it tug on someone's emotions based on the aesthetic aspect of writing? How does it need to be produced from a technology standpoint so that it actually communicates to its target audience? That's technological, the production of it. Is there a way to, you could think linguistic and writing systems. What happens if, or why would this thing be done with symbols instead of words? Is there a weakness or a strength to having only English text? Those sorts of things. So you can draw from the content I've already given you if you're in one of my classes. Okay, but I think those are all I have in that queue. I feel like I'm probably missing one, and that makes me sad because it means that I've failed. Let's go back here and say, almost there. I think we're here. Here we go. So, not that. What genre should my collage essay be in was a question, but the collage is the genre. A genre is any type or form of communication with socially agreed upon norms or conventions. It's not just a category, it's a type of communication. So collage is a type of communication. So these next questions are probably all going to focus on genre. So And I think I answered that one in a previous stream. So let's go here. After watching the video about genre, what's another good strategy to use during the rough drafting process of our work to make sure we're fully understanding the genre or prompt and to not confuse the audience? Okay, so those are two separate questions. One has to do with how do we write, and the other says how do we address the audience or not confuse the audience. So when we're watching the video about genre, so genres while rough drafting mean that it doesn't matter what you do in the rough draft process, and this is in chapter 2, I think, of my textbook, but it doesn't matter what you do in the writing process as long as it's squared away and gets you to a good product before the reader reads it. So, or the final reader reads it technically. So a good strategy that's connected to rough drafting and genre is try and map it out. If you're analyzing a problem, try and map it out visually, draw pictures of it, cartoon it, storyboard it, using those different genres to transform the way you're imagining the problem is one really good strategy. And it doesn't matter if it confuses anyone because it's about you trying to process and generate the best content. And readers will just enjoy that experience when it's polished later. During the rough drafting process, it's all about what you need to maintain and build and maintain momentum and to enhance the product. So sometimes essentializing, so we learn things about outlining. That's a type of writing, type of communication. And often it's taught at the beginning of an essay process. Outline your whole argument and then write it. But it can also be good to do free writing up to like 50%, or even do a rough draft of all of it and then try and outline and see if the structure still works. So that would be using that outlining genre at a different point in the writing process to say, how does it change the way I enhance my writing? So if I go and I do an outline of what's there and I realize that I can't follow the outline logic, I just have really good transitional phrases in the paragraphs, then maybe I need to shift things around and think umbrellas bigger to smaller or something. Mapping, visualizing. It can also be good to build up. So one thing that people do, and if you look through history, it's kind of cool when it comes to using genres as process work. Some people will, like I've thought about doing this. I had this idea for a character, and I started writing a short story that I thought might turn into a novel. And then I thought, well, so I did like the equivalent of like the first chapter in full novel form. And as I wrote that first chapter, it's 15, 20 pages, whatever it is of that story. And when we get to, I was like, I'm thinking about the whole picture, the whole story. And I'm going, you know what, the thing I want to do with this, what happens if I pull back and I try and do a quick plot version in like kids book form? And how would I translate what just happened in this down into 2 or 3 pages, and then because if I can do that, I can build the rest of the story quickly, almost like kids book or comic book graphic novel form. And so some people will use that strategy of like, let me build it in this shorter form because I can produce it faster, and then if people like it, I can make a bigger version. Right? We do the same thing. We'll go and we'll see people do this for movies or TV shows. They'll start with a TV show, build to a movie, or they'll start with a book and build to a TV show or a movie. In olden days, they would have periodicals, like newspapers that also had short stories in them. And some people got chapter books. Some of the more famous books, like I think Jane Austen wrote like this. Charles Dickens had at least 1 or 2 like this, and maybe Middlemarch, something like that. But where it would be published a chapter at a time, like a month at a time. And so they would write a chapter a month, and they'd get a little bit of money, and they'd get a little bit of sales, and they could respond to the things that seemed to interest people. I draw that into my like D&D campaigns for Dungeons and Dragons, and that to as well. Like I'm going to build a little bit and see what people respond to. All right, I may have belabored that point, but you can use genres at any point. The whole point of the writing process is to help you as a writer do whatever you need to in a healthy way to build and maintain momentum. That's a separate question of confusing the audience. The audience won't see any of it. They will just see a good final product when you're done. Can we add more pictures to our collage if we feel like we might need more photos with extra depth? Yes. If you are, especially if I've got multiple drafts of a project, if I have you take 15 photos and you're supposed to turn in 15 to 25 or 20 to 25, add what you need, pull out what you need. You can change the first and second between the first and second drafts. I'm just trying to give you opportunity to think about the multiple steps. So yes, absolutely. Where was that one? That was there. Let's see. Question about kairos. How would you use kairos in a sentence? And if I'm using it right, do you ever have a kairo moment? It's kairotic moment, which sounds funny, but Kairos is kairos, and it's about the timely moment. If it's using it, using kairos in a sentence, if it's asking like, what does it sound like? It's like I'm using this is a kairotic moment, which sounds funny, as I said. But if it's how do I have a timely moment in a sentence, punctuation helps. Recognizing that readers will often verbalize, even softly under their breath, what they're visually reading, and that punctuation makes us pause. So when we have, if we're writing it out, it's using things like the commas, the periods to set a pacing that then allows for a certain type of stop or a lack of stop. And that's what we get when people talk about like this idea of like flow, not flow state, that's different, but like the flow of a sentence or the rhythm of a sentence or the cadence of a sentence in poetics. Those sorts of things, that's built into timing just right. And sometimes you can think about kairos when you're writing, based on like when you get to like, especially poems that will use this, where you're developing writing and then you have like a hard stop line where a word suddenly pops by itself. And there's a lot more variety of options in that sort of realm. In this, do you ever have a moment of kairos? So all the time. So if kairos is about communicating with an awareness of timeliness of what you're saying, this is happening all the time. When you choose to speak, when you choose not to speak, when you choose to write, when you choose not to write, when you choose to respond in text message, when there is a timely moment to responses. Leaving people hanging on what the plans are for dinner, if they ask you, could just, depending on who that person is and what they need from you and when they're planning on grocery shopping, or what you need from them and when you're planning on grocery shopping, whatever it is, those are daily things we do where we have to think about, do I talk to them now? Right. So if I'm in a meeting and I get a message, and I happen to see that it's there, sometimes when I'm in a meeting with people, I'm trying to intentionally not focus on it. And so hopefully if someone knows I'm in a meeting, they won't send me something that's urgent in the middle of that. But I do every now and then I'll look over and glance over and make sure I'm not missing anything like right now. Yeah. And so if that happens, we're living it out on a daily basis. And so I have to make decisions about, do I step outside? If someone gives me a call in the middle of a meeting, is this person so important that whatever is happening in the meeting, they warrant stopping? If my wife calls me, and my wife never calls me, like she texts me, because we see each other, there's no emergency, right? If she calls me, if I see it, and I'm immediately going to try to get back to her because that's weird, right? And so we live these timely moments, and we live out the awareness of timely moments all day long. But having the language for it and recognizing how to craft responses is important. I've learned that some people really don't like emails at 11 o'clock at night when I feel like responding to them. So then I'll use technology to manage my response, and I'll say, send at 8 a.m. Because I know that one person likes that way, and I can use the affordances of technology to do that. Okay. Another question about genre. How do changes in culture and society affect genre over time? Well, genre is based on sociocultural norms and conventions. That means it transforms as the culture transforms, as the expectations transform. An example of this might be one of the easiest ways to do this is like, think about film study. And there you can see it with other things, but let's just talk about that. In certain eras, there was a style to horror films, right? the 1940s and 50s monsters from outer space is very different. The first version of War of the Worlds is very different from Mars Attacks in the 90s or whatever that was, and the War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise in it and Joaquin Phoenix, I think. And those are very dated references, but there are styles to these things. If you that were whole eras in film study, there was a time when long driving scenes of people traveling with sunsets were very part of the iconic, like, good cinematography. And so that genre shifted. And now we have a faster pace, faster pattern, cut scenes, jump scenes from one location to another, because they realized they were burning space and time and losing people's attention. And they didn't think it was as interesting to have that contemplative moment with the character. We can justify either of those things, but there are social norms and expectations that if someone goes to a movie and has 20 seconds of just the person driving and it's just one camera angle or two, that is now not as interesting. And it could be because we're used to 60-second scrolls, 15-second TikToks, whatever it is. That's a cultural shift. So if we're thinking about how do culture and society affect genre over time, that's just one example. The medium of choice is like, the internet. First we used to have books. People used to publish encyclopedias. Then we got the internet in the 90s. As far as like publicly accessible, and people could access different kinds of things. So then blogs were a big deal, and that sort of thing. And before people could post videos, because we didn't have the technological mechanisms, it was that's why Facebook developed the ability to post images and videos. And over time, it started out with just words. And then it was like an upgraded blog post. And then we shifted to video content like YouTube. And then we shifted to short form content. So all of these things transform, and where traffic is driven is guided by that. So that's the answer to how genres can change due to culture and society. And anytime your expectations from your audience change, you have to adapt as a writer. If your goal is to communicate with other humans and they don't accept the communication unless you do it this way, but you like doing it this other way, you have to decide whether communicating with them is more important than your preference. And so otherwise you get stuck, and people who aren't even old get stuck in doing things a certain way. So it's not so much about age, it's about flexibility versus rigidity. And so if you're someone who's rigidly holding to things that honestly aren't moral issues in the way you communicate, making sure you punctuate every sentence perfectly because that's how you were taught, but people don't care about that, and they care about they like emojis at the ends of sentences instead of periods. Well, that is another major example. It helps clarify tone. Frankly, I like emojis at the end of sentences. Otherwise, it can be a little boring. But staying flexible with that, because your goal is to connect with other humans, and unless you feel like enforcing a certain type of communication for very good reasons, why? That goes beyond the scope of the question for sure. Is there a commonly used genre today? What would you say is the most palatable for today's audience? That's too big a question. So the short answer is commonly used genre today, short form content, video content, huge, right? But there's just so much, and that's today in the US in a middle to upper class, and even then lower class, lower income class too. But I'll tell you that I didn't have a computer for typing up things until I was well into junior high. And not because they weren't around, but because, my mom had a boyfriend who built one for us, kind of thing. So is there a common genre? There's media everywhere, almost to the point of it's just too much. Frankly, there's more than we can possibly do. So we have to know it's more about how can we put blinders on ourselves to only focus on the things we want? Can we help use the algorithms of today to guide our content so that we're not just getting everything? And there's almost too much control or too much guidance. I don't know. That's a question for another time. What would you say is the most palatable for today's audience? Depends on the person. Audiences are big, but if we're talking about like a Gen Z audience versus a Gen Alpha versus we have to think of it. That's why these user profiles and avatars are so important, because if we have Gen Z or Gen Alpha, those are two separate avatars with two different cultural values and focuses. And if we say high income, middle income, low income, those are drastically different technologies they might have access to. I have seen research to distinguish between, and it's not 100% across the board, but that there is an income gap between the general iPhone user and the Android user, for better or worse, and whatever that says about people. But there is and so, if you're around a lot of people with iPhones, if you take rough thinking about this, more of them are going to be from more affluent families. If you have a whole lot of Androids around you, they're more likely to be from less affluent families or culture. And so that, for better or worse, that's just a thing. It doesn't mean it's always true. It doesn't mean that someone can't lean into it, but it means that if we're talking today's audience and we're really trying to hone in, well, it depends on who is the user or type of person we're really trying to communicate with. We have to think about, the more we get into analyzing these things, and whether it's in marketing or whatever, it depends on a rhetorical purpose. We have to start taking into account those more fine-tuned pull aparts of the audience, the analysis of the audience. Not that. When will we learn about the Rogerian model? I do have videos on it. Not every class will use it. Not every class will want to use it, but I don't necessarily use that for all of my classes right away. But the Rogerian model, in short, is based on Carl Rogers' model. He was a famous psychologist, and he came up with it's the model used for clinical psychology and especially counseling, marital counseling, relationship counseling. This idea, and it's founded on the premise that when we communicate, we should seek to understand first and then share our opinions or thoughts. And so, where a traditional essay starts with, and I've got a video on this, you can go watch it. It's only like 6 minutes long. But a traditional form of communication might say, I have an opinion, so I say it, and then I provide the reasons why it matters, and you should believe it. And then maybe I toss in some counterpoints. And then if you ask questions, I might add some filler to show that I understand what you're talking about. But it starts with what I care about and what my opinion is. That's more traditional Western rhetoric. Rogerian model says, if my goal in rhetorical purpose is understanding, then I need to start with showing that I understand. So here's what I heard you say, or here's what I understand about the context of the situation. I think this is true based on what you're saying. Based on the data, this seems to be true, and this seems to be true. Am I understanding correctly? Because if so, that makes me think X, Y, and Z, right? And so with the Rogerian model, I may not get... it may take me 50% of an essay or whatever piece of communication it is before I even get to my core opinion. I spend more time providing context, showing that I understand, and building credibility with my audience as someone who's sincerely interested in learning and understanding what's bothering them or what's happening with them or whatever the situation is. And so I'll actually borrow that and pull it into giving feedback. Like, I see that you did this practice. I can see why that could be good in these ways. However, or in addition, I think that this adjustment could be made to be better in this way, or to better handle this problem. Okay. My question is, if multiple genres can exist for one piece of writing? Absolutely. We have rom-coms, romantic, and comedy. So we have to think both and with genres. There are some genres that by definition will not overlap. You can't call something a movie and a book at the same time unless the movie is in the book, right? So if you open a book and read pages and then flip to a new page and some of video content, movie content starts playing, or you can QR code that, then maybe. But there are some genres that by definition can't overlap. But most of the time, you can have a both and. You can have a romance embedded into a fantasy, sci-fi thing. You can have a comedy that is also a science fiction thing. so where you've got a blend of genres. You can there are some things, like if you're supposed to be writing a technical report, that you can actually author it. I think mentioned a moment ago, like content management strategy says, if I can build a whole document and then, because of technology, choose to make it spit out as a Facebook post or or an Instagram or a tweet or a technical standard operating procedure, if I build the document right. So that it is possible for multiple genres to exist in one piece of writing or communication. And when we talk about it in my class, there's this idea of hybridization, where we talk about hybridizing or blending multiple genres. So when you're told to write an essay, that's a genre. If you're told to write a research-based personal narrative, then that's going to tie into two sometimes very different core practices and values, because you've got your narrative, a story you tell about you, right? And then you've got background research that's supposed to be influencing or supporting the things in your story. And so we have both the expressive form happening and the more knowledge delivery form. Okay, next question. Okay, that's not a question. That's just someone saying, I just want to let you know that your videos really do help my brain process information. I've had a hard time following along with other instructors, so just wanted to say thank you. I don't really have any questions. Sorry. Cool. That's exciting. Thanks for saying that. Let's see. Complete our diagram. If you have, this one is about how do I complete a fishbone diagram. In this instance, this could have been, so if you aren't sure, there's a variety of ways to complete a fishbone diagram. If the question is how do I produce one, I think I ultimately told this person, worst case, you can literally just draw a map out with your hand. But if it's more like, I don't know what the categories are, like if you Google fishbone diagramming, there's tons of stuff on it. That's open source, and you can just basically follow the patterns. So I don't spend a lot of time like delving into the individual pieces. I just want you to think about how many different ways you can pull apart a thing, depending on what it's about. So don't overstress it. Just try it however it's useful to you. I'm not looking for a perfect fishbone diagram. I just want to see that you're trying to practice it. Would you be able to provide an example of how understanding exigence can significantly change the tone or direction of a piece? When people, so let's see. Okay, the first thing that comes to mind, and I can't think of a specific example, but if we're looking, say, at 2016, 2017, it's one of those like, well, that video didn't age well kind of things. It's like after the Me Too movement and things like that, people were much more aware of workplace relationships and appropriate or inappropriate behavior, that sort of thing. And so if then in our media something came up where maybe if we look at the 1980s or 1990s or early 2000s and we see, well, that was a little bit odd. Maybe back then it was a little bit odd. And now we're like, that's giving me the ick, to use a not so technical term, right? So that would be something where it's like, maybe I think at one point, I can't remember specific movies, but imagine movies in the 90s were like this. But imagine that you've got like the manager at a movie theater is interested in dating one of his subordinates who just got hired by another manager, but still technically in the chain of command. And so, in the 90s, it'd be probably normal to see that character like try and, flirt with her on work and ask her out and that kind of thing. Maybe sit and watch a movie together, while they're supposed to be cleaning a theater or something goofy like that. Well, that would play very differently in 2017, 2018, after all this about like appropriate workplace relationships and not misusing or abusing power relationships and that kind of thing. It would read differently. So that's how, and so exigence has to do with the time, like why I write right now and the timely moment. And so if someone's trying to use that, if someone is responding to the Me Too movement with that kind of message, versus responding to wanting to tell the story of a powerful romance, in the 90s, a movie like that's trying to tell a powerful romance, that message might come through. In 2017, 2018, and now, that message is going to be completely washed away by this other thing that we need to be aware of in the context connected to that type of relationship between subordinate. If you think, so yeah, we'll just leave it at that. I think that might be almost there. Let's see. I think I've answered all the questions but one. In your video, you mentioned that genre can be used, that can use the 8 aspects of writing, but I thought genre was one part of the 8 aspects. Maybe I'm getting confused. I understand that genre can be part of what we normally think different types of the same subject. In the video mentioned, we think of genre as romance, comedy, mystery, horror, and so on. So let's start there. I call genre the unicorn of writing because it touches on it touches on every single part of them. So each aspect of writing changes the genre. So if we and can affect how we view genre. So genre is in every category. There are genres of sentences, types of communication that are common, and we might think in linguistics. And so that would be like the interrogative sentence where we're asking a question, the imperative sentence where we're giving a command, and so on. We can even have genres of phrases like the transitional phrase, the contradictory phrase, that kind of thing. We can have genres of paragraphs. And so that would be like an introduction paragraph, a body content paragraph, and a conclusion paragraph. Those are different types of communication with expectations, both in the content and the structure and that kind of thing. Then we can have different types of writing, different types of technologies, different genres for putting information in our brains faster, different structures, like IMRD format for science writing versus a more humanities-based argument paper. They still might be called essays or papers or research papers, but different disciplines will do them differently, which means that now we're dealing with sociocultural norms. We have genres of analysis like fishbone diagramming, stakeholder. So genre can be affected by all the 8 aspects of writing. And so it is one component of writing, but it's so commonly taught about because it's affected by all these aspects. So when I was designing the 8 aspects model, one of the coolest parts was to go, what are people teaching and why are they teaching it so much? So, and one of the things that came out that was interesting was anywhere I saw an overlap of aspects of writing, I saw a core thing. So genre is one of these. Thesis statements, right? They get hammered on, right? And that's because a thesis statement is supposed to be structural, rhetorical, and analytical all at once, and concise. And it's got a linguistic limitation of 1 to 2 sentences, right? But it's doing a very specific job in a very specific way at a specific time. So anytime you see this this unifying of the aspects of writing, you usually see a major thing that's been taught, even if people couldn't pull it apart into the 8 aspects or just didn't because the model wasn't there, right? So that's so that kind of is to get at how is genre part of the 8 aspects and also bigger than them. So I can understand genre is so broadly connected. It's such a huge concept to understand. And it can be influenced and genres shift based on one shift in any of the aspects of writing. You change the technology, you change the genre. You change the rhetorical purpose, you change the genre, and so on and so forth. And you change the culture, you change the genre. Okay. In writing, is it more of how we're doing it, like online or paper? Yes. It includes who's it for, children, our peers, our family, our friends? Yes. Like you have a different genre for communicating to children. You have a different genre for communicating to, so we can write a kid's book, we can write a graphic novel, we can, even though they have very similar overlaps, a graphic novel is going to be targeted toward an older audience than a kid's book. It's going to have It may not have a core moral lesson like a kid's book usually does. It may not have the same emphasis on teaching about culture or language or a topic or morality that a comic book does. And so, and then we might have difference in comic book versus novel and movie and stuff. Can this be informal or does it have to be formal? Yes. So that's the thing is genre is capable. When we talk about genre as a concept, it helps us understand why there are so many different types of writing and why they can be fine-tuned and targeted and why they have presets based on audience and purpose and structure and things like and you can dial those, you can adjust within a genre a little bit, but you do want to make sure that if you deviate from the audience expectation in any rhetorical context, that you do it well and with enough signaling that the audience doesn't just rage quit your communication. Okay, that's all I have. I'm going to stop there, and I've gone way longer than I meant to. I'm not sure if it even made sense, but hopefully it was helpful. I'll share it with students and whatnot. Have a good one.